Young woman offers shelter to a freezing dog, shocked when its owner arrives in a private jet. Before we begin this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. The world had shrunk to the 4 shivering walls of the Warm Spoon, a diner whose name had become a cruel irony. Outside, a blizzard raged, a merciless entity of wind and ice that had choked the small mountain town of Havenwood for 3 days straight. Inside, Elara felt a different kind of cold, one that settled deep in the bones and couldn't be shaken by the diner's ancient, rattling furnace. It was the cold of finality. The last of the firewood was dwindling to ash, the pantry shelves were a study in emptiness, and the final disconnection notice from the power company lay on the counter, its red lettering a stark wound against the faded formica. She was 24, a widow for 2 of those years, and the diner, her husband's only legacy, was dying with the last embers in the hearth. Her hands, chapped and raw from endless washing in lukewarm water, trembled as she wiped down a table for the 10th time that day. There were no customers. There hadn't been since the storm hit. The neon sign outside, which once proudly proclaimed the Warm Spoon, now sputtered and died, the O's and spoon flickering like a pair of tired eyes before giving in to the darkness. It was a perfect metaphor for her own fading hope. Every creak of the building, every howl of the wind, sounded like a final judgment. She was alone, adrift in a sea of white, with nothing but the ghosts of debt and failure for company. It was in this profound silence, broken only by the storm's fury, that she heard it. A faint, desperate scratching at the back door. It was a sound so out of place in the white void that she thought, for a moment, the wind was playing tricks on her. But then it came again, more insistent this time, a plea against the wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. No one in their right mind would be out in this. The roads were impassable. The town hunkered down in a state of emergency. A knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Yet, beneath the fear was a flicker of something else. A deep-seated compassion that had been both her greatest strength and, in a world that valued practicality, her most profound weakness. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from the stove and crept toward the back door, the icy floorboards groaning under her worn boots. The scratching stopped. She waited, her breath held tight in her chest. A low whine cut through the wind, a sound of pure misery that dissolved her fear instantly. It wasn't a monster. It was something in pain. She unbolted the door and pulled it open just enough to peer out into the swirling chaos of snow. There, huddled against the wall, was the largest dog she had ever seen. It was a creature of shadow and snow, its fur a matted mix of black and gray, caked with ice. It looked more wolf than dog, with intelligent, amber eyes that glowed with a weary light. It shivered violently, one paw held limply off the ground, and as it looked up at her, it didn't bark or growl, but simply whined again, a soft, broken sound. Immediately, her landlord's face flashed in her mind. Mr. Gable, a man whose heart was as cold and barren as the winter landscape. His rules were absolute. No extensions, no excuses, and absolutely unequivocally no pets. To harbor this animal was to invite certain eviction, to throw away the last threadbare chance she had. She couldn't afford another mouth to feed. She could barely feed herself. The logical thing, the sensible thing, was to close the door, to leave the beast to its fate in the storm and focus on her own impossible survival. But as she looked into those exhausted amber eyes, she saw not a beast, but a fellow soul lost in the storm. She saw a reflection of her own desperation, her own silent plea for warmth, for a safe harbor. In that moment, the threat of Mr. Gable, of starvation, of homelessness, all faded behind the overwhelming, undeniable call of a life in need. Her own problems were immense, but they were not the only problems in the world. With a resolve that surprised even herself, she opened the door wider. "Okay," she whispered into the wind, her voice raw. "Okay, come on. Get in here before we both freeze." The great dog seemed to understand. It limped painfully over the threshold, collapsing onto the worn linoleum of her kitchen with a heavy sigh. The cold that followed it inside was quickly replaced by a sense of shared sanctuary. Alara bolted the door against the storm and knelt beside the animal. Its fur was like ice, its breathing shallow. She grabbed the last of her clean towels and began to gently dry it, her touch slow and reassuring. As the ice melted away, she saw that beneath the grime, its coat was thick and well-kept. Around its neck was a wide, sturdy leather collar, worn but clearly made of fine material. It bore no name, only a small, smooth metal tag that felt strangely heavy. Her own stomach rumbled, a hollow ache that reminded her of the last can of beef stew in the pantry. It was meant to be her dinner for the next 2 days. Without a second thought, she fetched it, opened it, and warmed it on the stove. The rich smell filled the small kitchen, a fragrance of comfort and home that felt like a distant memory. She poured the stew into a large bowl, one of the few remaining from a full set, and placed it on the floor. The dog, whom she had decided to call Shadow, lifted its head, its nose twitching. It looked from the bowl to her, a question in its amber eyes. "It's okay," she said softly, stroking its broad head. "You eat. You need it more than I do." Shadow ate with a hunger that was desperate but not frantic, as if retaining a sense of dignity even in its starvation. As it ate, Alara examined its injured paw. It was swollen and bruised, but seemed to have no broken bones. She cleaned it as best she could with warm water and wrapped it in strips torn from an old dishcloth. A quiet companionship settled between them in the small, warm kitchen. The storm raged on, but for the first time in days, Alara didn't feel entirely alone. They were two lost souls weathering the same storm, sharing the last of their resources. The flickering lights of the diner seemed, for a moment, to burn a little brighter. The fragile peace was shattered the next morning by a violent pounding on the front door that was far too aggressive to be the wind. Alara's heart sank. It was Mr. Gable. She quickly hid Shadow's bowl and urged the dog to lie quietly in the back room before cracking open the door. Gable stood on the porch, his face a mask of pinched fury, snowflakes clinging to his thin mustache. "The sign is out, Alara," he barked, not even bothering with a greeting. "And so is my patience. The rent is 3 months overdue. I've been more than generous." "The storm, Mr. Gable," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "No one can get through. Business has been—" "Excuses," he snapped, his eyes scanning the diner's interior with disdain. His gaze fell upon the water bowl she'd forgotten by the counter. His eyes narrowed. "What is that? I hope you're not violating the terms of your lease. You know my policy on animals." It's for a leak," she lied, her face flushing with heat. He didn't believe her for a second. He pushed past her, his wet boots leaving dirty tracks on her clean floor. "I'm giving you 24 hours, Alara. 24 hours to come up with every last cent you owe me, or I'm having the sheriff escort you out of here. And if I find you're hiding some filthy stray." He let the threat hang in the air, a promise of swift and merciless retribution. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving Alara shaking with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. The deadline was impossible. It was a death sentence for her home, for her husband's dream, all because she had chosen to be kind. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but as Shadow limped out from the back room and nudged her hand with its cold nose, she knew she wouldn't have changed a thing. Desperation clawed at her. She had nothing to sell, no one to call. Her gaze fell on Shadow, who was now resting his great head on her lap. She reached for the collar again, her fingers tracing the smooth, unmarked metal tag. It was her only clue, her only infinitesimal sliver of hope. She turned it over and over, and this time her nail caught on something. A series of tiny, almost invisible markings etched onto the back. They weren't letters, but numbers. She squinted, holding it to the dim light. It was a long string, too long for a local phone number. Her mind raced. What could it be? She thought of the high-tech gear hikers sometimes carried. With a surge of adrenaline, she went to the diner's old rotary phone, its connection a crackling, unreliable thing. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed the local veterinarian, Mrs. Gable's cousin, a woman who shared his sour disposition. After a long, crackling pause, the vet answered. Alara described the tag, reading the numbers aloud. "That's not a microchip ID," the vet said curtly, her voice dripping with impatience. "And it's not a local registration. Sounds like a satellite phone number. Only people with serious money or serious jobs have those. Probably stolen. You should call the sheriff and have that animal put down before it gives you rabies." The line went dead. A satellite phone. The words echoed in Alara's mind, painting a new picture of the dog sleeping peacefully on her floor. This was no ordinary stray. This was a lost, valuable animal. Her hope, which had been a dying ember, now flared. Maybe, just maybe, this was a way out. She had to try. Using the last of the credit on her prepaid cell phone, her fingers shaking so badly she had to dial twice, she punched in the long string of numbers. It rang once, twice, a strange, ethereal tone that seemed to travel across the world. Then, a voice answered, rough and distorted by static, but clear enough to understand. "This is Thorn. Who is this?" The voice was deep, laced with anxiety. "Hello? My name is Alara," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. I think I found your dog." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Fenrir? Is he alive? Is he safe?" "He's safe," Alara confirmed, a wave of relief washing over her. "He's here with me at my diner in Havenwood. He hurt his paw, but he's okay." The man, Thorn, let out a long, shuddering sigh. The raw relief in that sound was palpable, even across the crackling line. "Thank God. We were separated in the whiteout during a search operation. I've been out of my mind. Listen to me, Alara. The storm has everything grounded. I can't get to you right now, but the second there's a break in the weather, I'm coming. Don't you worry about a thing. I will make this right. I promise you." The line cut out as her phone battery died, but his promise hung in the air. "I will make this right." It was a lifeline, but the storm showed no signs of breaking, and Mr. Gable's clock was ticking. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety. The wind howled, the snow fell, and the 24 hours dwindled to nothing. Faced with a choice, Alara spent the last $7 in her cash register not on a loaf of bread for herself, but on a small bag of dry dog food from the corner store. It was a final, quiet act of defiance against the crushing logic of her situation. She would not let this creature starve, even if it meant she would. As dusk fell on the final day, she sat with Shadow, now named Fenrir, sharing the last of her crackers, resigned to her fate. The knock on the door came exactly on time. Mr. Gable stood there, flanked by a young, uncomfortable-looking sheriff's deputy. "Time's up, Alara," Gable said, a smug smile on his face. "Pack your things." Alara's heart broke. She had failed. She stood, her shoulders slumped in defeat, ready to accept the inevitable. But as the deputy began to speak, a new sound intruded, a low, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that grew steadily louder, vibrating through the floorboards. It wasn't a truck. It was something bigger, something alien to their small town. Everyone looked towards the field behind the diner. Through a sudden, miraculous break in the snowfall, they saw it. A sleek, black helicopter descending from the gray sky, its landing lights cutting through the gloom. It touched down in a whirlwind of snow, and a single figure emerged, silhouetted against the light. The man strode towards them, his movements filled with purpose. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy-duty winter coat and boots that spoke of function, not fashion. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He walked right past Gable and the stunned deputy as if they were invisible and went straight to the diner door, which Alara now held open in disbelief. "Fenrir!" the man called, his voice thick with emotion. The great dog bounded forward, the limp all but gone, and launched itself into the man's arms. The reunion was one of pure, unrestrained joy. After a long moment, the man, Silas Thorne, looked up at Alara. His piercing gaze took in everything at once. her threadbare sweater, her worn hands, the empty shelves behind the counter, the eviction notice still clutched in Gable's hand. He understood. He turned to the landlord. "You're Gable?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "I am," Gable puffed up, sensing a person of importance. "This woman is illegally harboring an animal and is 3 months behind on her rent. I'm having her evicted." Silas nodded slowly. "How much does she owe you?" "For everything. The back rent, the building, all of it." Gable, momentarily flustered by the audacious question, greedily calculated in his head. $50,000, he said, naming a figure that was nearly double the property's actual value. Silas didn't even blink. He reached into his coat, pulled out a checkbook, and wrote. He tore the check off and handed it to the dumbfounded landlord. "Here is $500,000, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "That's for the building and for the pleasure of never seeing your face again. A lawyer from my company will be here tomorrow to handle the transfer of the deed. Now get off my property." He then turned to Alara, his expression softening completely. He held out a pen and the deed application. "This is yours now," he said simply. "Thank you for saving my best friend." The news of what happened at the Warm Spoon spread through Havenwood faster than a winter fire. The story was told and retold, embellished with every telling. The quiet, struggling widow was no longer an object of pity or scorn. She was a local hero. The deputy, who had stood by awkwardly during the entire exchange, returned later that evening, his hat in his hands, to apologize profusely. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Alara's gaze now stopped by, offering help, congratulations, and friendship. The town's collective heart, it seemed, had thawed. Silas Thorne, it turned out, was the founder of a global disaster relief organization. Fenrir was his lead search and rescue dog, a celebrated hero credited with dozens of saves. They had been on a mission to find a hiker lost in the national park when the blizzard hit, separating them. Silas wasn't just wealthy. He was a man who dedicated his life and resources to helping others. And in Alara, he recognized a kindred spirit. He didn't just give her the diner. He invested in it. He offered her a new role, to run the first regional branch of his foundation from Havenwood. The diner would be its headquarters, a place that would not only serve food but also provide warmth, shelter, and aid to anyone in the surrounding mountain communities who needed it. She accepted without hesitation. It was the work she was born to do. Months later, spring had finally come to Havenwood. The snow had melted, revealing a world reborn in green and gold. The diner, now renamed The Hearth, was unrecognizable. It was fully renovated, bright and welcoming, with a new, steady neon sign that glowed with a warm, unwavering light. The tables were always full, not just with paying customers, but with locals who needed a hot meal, a warm place to sit, or a friendly face. Alara, Silas, and Fenrir were a constant presence, an unconventional but deeply bonded family forged in the heart of a storm. Alara's hands were still busy, but they were no longer chapped and trembling from cold and fear. They were steady and sure as she served plates of hot food, as she filled out grant applications for families in need, as she rested them on Fenrir's broad, loyal head. She had faced the darkest, coldest night of her soul, and had chosen to light a candle for another rather than curse the darkness. She learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the warmth you are willing to share. For in the end, a single act of kindness, offered without expectation of reward, can be the one thing that saves you, and in saving another you might just save the world. We hope this story warmed your heart. If it did, please consider subscribing to our channel for more inspirational content just like this.